Hi. I used to work in creative development at a couple of the big streaming services, and I learned two big things. 1. Hollywood is filled with lizard people. 2. Lizard people love prequels. But that's no surprise. Close your eyes and press random buttons on your TV remote and you'll probably land on something like House of the Dragon, and/or Rings of Power, and/or Dune Prophecy, and/or Better Call Saul, and/or. The fact that Hollywood loves prequels is clear, but what's less clear is why, and what separates good prequels from bad prequels, as well as why should we care? You should care because prequels are Hollywood trying to trick you. Streaming services are in a bind right now because you have so many options of things to watch. Like right now, instead of watching me, you could be watching The Wire. Why aren't you watching The Wire? This never-ending stream of TV shows makes it difficult for new shows to stand out. But the lizard people are clever foes. They found a way to hijack previous successes, reanimate them into new flesh, and then capture your attention forever and ever and ever. And there's something subtly insidious about taking the name of something we love, changing literally every creative voice behind it, and then presenting it as though it's a continuation of that thing. But that's what a lot of spin-offs do. And to be clear, where spin-off prequels are relatively new, spin-offs themselves are not. You might be surprised to learn how many famous TV shows tried to launch spin-offs. But these spin-offs weren't prequels, they were set in the present time, which meant they didn't recast anyone. These shows were just honest, simple, cash-grabbing attempts to flesh out supporting characters they thought their audience might like enough to watch on their own. But this begs the question of why nowadays every new spin-off seems to be a prequel instead of an at-the-same-time-quel or a post-quel. Sequel. The answer becomes clear when we remember that, to the lizards, their exclusive rights to these expensive franchises are precious jewels. And where the consequences of a bad prequel are pretty harmless, sequels, if done poorly, have the nasty potential to cheapen the lizards' whole family of jewels. To see this in action, we don't need to look further than Star Wars. From now until the end of time. Whenever we rewatch Darth Vader hurling Emperor Palpatine into an exploding abyss, we're haunted by the knowledge that its sequel will later cheapen Palpatine's death by telling us that
somehow Palpatine returned.
Bad sequels have a time-bending ability to not only suck, but to also make the films that preceded them suck. Sequels have such that they can
influence the midi-chlorians to create life.
No. I was gonna say bad sequels have the power to make bad prequels look charming. It's like what Trump did to George W. Bush's legacy. Nobody liked Bush or Jar Jar Binks as they were happening, but now we look back and go, how quaint and lovely those times were. So quaint and lovely, they caused Disney to greenlight a 40-year-old Hayden Christensen to do this in Ahsoka, which, for the people keeping score at home, is a prequel series flashback to an animated prequel TV show which spun out of the prequel trilogy to the original Star Wars trilogy. Yeah. But even beyond the dangers of sequels, sometimes shows have to be prequels because Hollywood can't wait long enough for the full original stories to be adapted. Like Dune Prophecy had to be a prequel because the new movie trilogy is only going to cover the first 2 Dune books, which means the show can't go further than that without stepping on toes. But to be fair, Dune Prophecy also had to be a prequel because books 3 through 6 of Dune get weird. Another motivation for Hollywood to go the prequel route is the fact that sequels are harder to make. Since they're set after the cool stuff has already happened, sequels force writers to figure out the next interesting thing, which is tougher to do than the old prequel trick of just explaining the origins of an iconic thing, which segues precisely into the important question of nearly every bad prequel you can think of shares one common flaw. The stories that we love, the kinds that lizards love to purchase, contain many elements. One of the reasons I find the Lord of the Rings books and films endlessly enjoyable to consume is that they feel like a perfect BLT sandwich. The individual ingredients are great, but the magic comes from how each complements the other ingredients. A big mistake Amazon's prequel series Rings of Power makes is that it looks at the full Lord of the Rings BLT and then says, let's tell the story of the lettuce. Let's spend 5 seasons getting to the bottom of how lettuce becomes lettuce. Like, we love Gandalf because he's a fascinating character who does fascinating things inside of a fascinating world, but Rings of Power seems to think that we love Gandalf because his name is Gandalf. This misunderstanding explains why the show seemed to hold for applause when it finally said,
Gandalf. That's what they're going to call me, isn't it?
You don't even have to hate the show or anything to agree that if you removed its ability to say the words Galadriel, Sauron, and Mithril, it wouldn't have many other words left. Good prequels aren't like this. If you took the Game of Thrones label off of House of the Dragon, the show wouldn't implode. Like, this episode with Viserys didn't cause me to literally stand up and clap because it happened to have a Targaryen with name brand recognition. I clapped because I finally saw a weak man standing up on his own literal and metaphorical 2 feet. Viserys summoning the strength to make his own choices after 8 episodes of being passive was as satisfying to watch as any great moment in the main series of Game of Thrones. The same thing would happen if you remove Star Wars from Andor. The fact that they're stealing money from the Empire in this scene isn't what matters. You could remove its expensive name tags and you'd still have an amazing heist story. Ocean's 11 in space, for God's sake. Star Wars is sort of an infinite well of these examples because there's an infinite supply of spin-offs and prequels. But no case study better demonstrates the difference between successful and unsuccessful prequels than the difference between the series Andor and Obi-Wan. This is a particularly good example because of their vast difference in name brand recognition. Like, most people have a greater level of attachment to Obi-Wan Kenobi than they do to Cassian Andor. This should give Obi-Wan a huge leg up, but Disney...
Are you going to play Obi-Wan Kenobi again?
Yes.
Disney didn't listen to Han Solo when he said,
Great kid, don't get cocky.
Obi-Wan made the same mistake as Rings of Power. Disney seemed to think that their audience would be gripped just by seeing Ewan McGregor back on screen. And so instead of creating new, exciting things, they pushed all of their chips into the lazy expectation that we would care about this fight just because it's Obi-Wan versus Darth Vader. And they're kind of right. I mean, I watched it, but I had a much better time watching Andor, a Star Wars prequel without lightsabers, Jedi, or the Force. The show's Star Warsiness is really just its setting. It's the ability for its characters to legally say the word Coruscant. Good prequels like Andor selectively reference the stories they're based on. They don't abuse our love for BLTs by giving us the origin story of tomatoes. They do a great job of creating their own distinct sandwiches. This metaphor is the smartest thing I've ever said. They demonstrate something very important, because despite my personal feelings of yuck at Hollywood abusing prequels, the lizard people are correct that setting their new TV shows within worlds we already love is an advantage. Prequels do have a lot of power, but the same way the lizards should listen to Han Solo, they should listen to Uncle Ben.
With great power comes great responsibility.